Okay, you ready? Okay. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Dick Merritt, United States Marine Corps, retired. We're interviewing Command Sergeant Major William R. Brown, United States Army, here in Grand Junction, Colorado. Sergeant Major Brown was born on 5 October 1922. He just had a birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Just 5 days ago. And the people that are doing the interviewing is myself from Grassroots Television in Aspen, and Corby Anderson, Executive Director of Grassroots Television in Aspen, Colorado. We are working with the Veterans History Project in association with the Library of Congress, and also concurrently filming for the 10th Mountain Division historical branch here today. So I'll start right off, and Sergeant Major, just talk about the wars and the branch of service that you were in, that you served with.
I was in the 10th Mountain Division. I was First Sergeant in Company L of the 86th Regiment. And in Korea, I had the INR platoon for the 7th Division and worked between the 31st Infantry and the 32nd Infantry.
So what was your rank when you retired?
Command Sergeant Major.
Right at the top of the...
That's the top
enlisted list there.
Right.
Right. That's...
Probably I made a mistake when I could have got a battlefield commission.
And you mentioned that you served in Europe in World War II and in Korea, and then a number of stateside, among them being at Dartmouth University, Dartmouth College, after the Korean conflict. And we'll get into that a little later.
And also at Dartmouth and up in Alaska. I guess we weren't a state then, was it?
Territory of Alaska.
Yeah, right. I was in Alaska.
Traveled around
right.
quite a bit. So in the military, it isn't all battles. There's a lot of training of civilians and PR work, and that background led you to being the general manager of Vail, which we'll get into.
Right, thank you.
And I'm in the ski business myself, and there's great respect for you over the years in the ski industry for the work you did in developing Vail. When you came into the Army, were you drafted or did you enlist?
Oh no, I was enlisted because I think that's about the time you'd get a U.S. in front of your name, and I wanted an R.A. Mm-hmm. So my serial number, which I don't know my Social Security number, but I know my Army, RA 191696686.
Mine was 073676 in the Marine Corps. They're now in Social Security. I don't like it, and I don't think you would like it either,
no,
Sarge.
So.
Yeah. And what was that time frame when you enlisted? Was that before World War II or after the Pearl Harbor?
No, it was right at Pearl Harbor, about the time it all happened. That's the reason I knew that I better get in the Army or be drafted, and I got that U.S. in front of my serial number.
Regular Army.
Yeah, right.
Where were you living when you enlisted?
I was going to school at the University of Idaho at Moscow, but then I was living in McCall, Idaho. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I enlisted down at Boise. That's where the enlistment was.
Can you tell me a little bit about your boyhood, what your father did and where you lived in Idaho?
My father was Forest Ranger in McCall, Idaho, and that's where I learned to ski. And now there's kids ride the school bus. When I went to school, I skied 2 miles to school and 2 miles home. And so then I was skiing all the time, and so I was a pretty good cross-country runner. And at the age 16 at Horseshoe Bend, Idaho, I won the state cross-country championship at 16. But then I was basically a four-way skier.
Four-way skier.
Right.
What was your father's background? I'm thinking he must have been somewhat of a disciplinarian to bring you up so that you could spend the years that you spent in the Army.
Oh yes, my dad was an old German, and the discipline was unbelievable. Any time that you got yourself in trouble, best not to get in trouble, because out to the woodshed, he would say, and pick the stick you want to be beat on. And you only have to do that a couple times.
So Army boot camp was no problem?
No, that was no problem at all.
Well, what were your first days like in the service when you went to boot camp? Where was that?
At Fort Lewis, Washington. And so I went down there, and that's when it was real regular Army. And so you never got out of line down there, and so they if you did, you were in trouble.
Do you remember the names of any of your instructors?
No, and I don't. No, and I probably don't want to. That's the old days in the Army. I don't know about the Marines, where they had pure lemon extract and vanilla, which was alcohol, and when you went on KP, which all the enlistees were doing, you'd get in the kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they'd be half loaded on the vanilla extract and lemon. Maybe they did that in Marines, I don't know.
Well, I've heard some stories from a friend of mine that was in Tinian. Today's military is different from when you and I were in that a lot of the KP duty is outsourced now.
Oh,
that's all. The troops don't do that anymore.
No, it's all contracted.
Contracted out.
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah, contracted out. Did you have any problem getting through the boot camp, either physically or mentally?
No, I didn't. But which I'll back up on also is that when I enlisted, they had a paratroop outfit. Maybe a lot of people don't realize they had a paraski when I was stationed in Fort Douglas, Utah. And so I enlisted to get my jump training in the paratroops, because I wanted to go in that, because it was $50 more a month.
Jump pay.
Jump pay, that's right. And so I took some basic training at Toccoa, Georgia, in troop training.
Is that where Fort Benning is today?
No, this was out 90 miles from Fort Benning.
90 miles from Benning.
90 miles from Fort Benning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up right near Mount Rainier, near Fort Lewis, in World War II. In my hometown, we had some of the 10th Mountain training up there at Ranger Creek and Cayuse Pass. That was that regiment up there at Mount Rainier.
Right. I think in the 4th Infantry was stationed. They were they got recruits out of the 4th Infantry, which was at Fort Lewis, Washington also. Mm-hmm. The 87th was formed at Fort Lewis, Washington, right. Right.
I know Fritz Benedict from Aspen was up there at Mount Rainier in that regiment.
Right.
Yeah. After, of course, you mentioned serving in World War II in Korea. Where did you go when you were in Italy with the 10th Mountain Division?
Well, we landed at what is it, Piazza?
Piazza.
Right, or whatever it is, and we went up through Rome, and then we went all up through that area there, and went on through to Italy and through Belvedere and Riva Ridge and Po Valley and on into the Austrian border.
Well, just this last week, the Ken Burns on PBS presented The War, and I saw a lot of the footage on Riva Ridge and the night climb up there.
Right, G Company made that. We were in reserve. 86th Regiment was in reserve.
Reserve
right.
There, yeah. There was another deployment to Kiska in the Aleutians. Ralph Ball was up there.
Right.
And they came back, and then they went to Italy afterwards.
Right. Well, they came back to Camp Hale was started. And the 87th, when they came back from Kiska, we went up to the 87th. It was at Camp Hale. And when I went to Camp Hale, that's when they were forming the 86th Regiment, the 3 regiments. And the next one was formed was the 86th. And when I got there, I got into Denver and going to Pando, Colorado, and the MPs at Denver didn't know where Pando, Colorado was. And I stayed one night or 2 nights, or I can't remember, at the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Denver. And the MPs come down and got me, and I went up to Pando, Colorado, and they had the station guy there, the little shack where he reported in, and that was probably the meanest radio or whatever he had operating the radios, telephones to the MPs. God, he was a mean man, and come down to pick you up down at Camp Hale. So Pando, Colorado, there's always a fond memory when the railroad guy there.
Was the camp built? Were there buildings there when you arrived?
The buildings were there, but they most of them, the 86th was in there, and they were built it, but the 85th and 86th wasn't. In the first night or 2, I slept in the old mule barns until the bureaucracy got through the Corps of Engineers inspecting the barracks so we could get in. And so then I was in the 86th, which at that time was G prime, and I could ski, and in fact I'm myself a very good skier. So they were training up at Cooper Hill. Out of Leadville, and so I was up there teaching skiing, which was Fat City, and we were living up there. But then one day I was called out and said, "You're going back to camp," and I said, "For what?" And they said, "They're forming an NCO academy to train NCOs," and I said, and they said, "You have had ROTC and basic training, so you have been selected." Captain Adams was the commandant of the NCO school. So I went down to there, and then by that time when I got out there, they had formed L Company, the 86th. And so I went over there, and from there I went to they put me in charge of that's when we had a weapons platoon in the company before we went to Camp Swift. And so I was, like everybody else, a PFC, and so I was in charge of the weapons platoon. And so then the training we did at Camp Hale, I don't know whether they could do it today or not, because we crawled under barbed wire with live machine guns. Of course, they were blocked, and keep your head down, and through barbed wire and mud, and so that was our training up at Camp Hale, plus all the rest of the stuff. Camp Hale was harder than combat.
Harder than combat. Well, Ski Cooper or Cooper Hill is still there.
It's still there, right? The Army put that toe in there at Cooper Hill, and now they've got other one, but that was the start of Cooper Hill, and those old barracks were still there. I think they still use those up at.
Oh, up at.
Right. Yeah, they don't use them. I think that's a restaurant and all the rest of them, but they didn't tear them down.
Mm-hmm. But they did at Camp Hale.
Oh yeah, they tore all those buildings down up at Camp Hale. Of course, later on when I came back from overseas and out of the hospitals, they had Mountain Training Center, and then we moved up to Camp Hill. Of course, then we lived in Quonset huts up there because they tore down the
others.
Oh, yeah, tore down the others, which was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And we trained. Actually, we trained Marines there too, and Special Forces up at Camp Hill. But that was fond memories up there.
Well, during that time, that's when you ran into Peter Green and
Oh yeah, that was
some Aspen people,
oh yeah, those were the draftees.
the draftees.
They were the draftees that there was a spin-off, and that's when they had Mountain Training Center. And some of those kids went to Alaska. And they took basic trader. Peter Green was there, and Charlie Patterson, and I've heard from a lot of them as of today yet.
They still talk about you over in Aspen. Peter mentioned it's about the reveille in the morning.
Oh yeah. They didn't like to get out of bed. They all like to sleep in the morning. They're used to that civilian life. So you go in, turn over their beds, dump their foot lockers upside down. And then that was duty for the weekend.
That sounds like the Marine Corps.
Oh yeah, so they soon learned you can't do that anymore.
Right. Well, let's get back to Italy. What was your assignment in Italy in World War II?
Well, I was when I was down at Camp Swift. So back up a little. At Camp Swift, I was a weapons platoon sergeant, and then when they down at Swift, when the 10th Mountain moved out of Camp Hill, they went to Swift, and they formed the weapons company, M Company, and it was I, K, L, and M, and so our first sergeant, Dick Cochran, went from L Company when they formed M Company, the heavy weapons company, and so then I was promoted to first sergeant at Camp Swift. So
You haven't been in the Army that long.
no,
Go to
but
first sergeant.
I know I was very young. In fact, I was youngest first sergeant in the division at that time, and but I was tough, and that's when we had 9 mules in each company that carried our kitchen and ammo, and that's where each third platoon had when they took the weapons away from us, had machine guns, and so the third platoon had those, and that carried the ammo and all the kitchens. The mules did.
How much logistical support or any problems with the mules?
One thing, the only good thing about the mules was when they'd have problems and lose part of your kitchen, you had to requisition more, not lots of new stuff. But the mules were more trouble than the men, because they had one man take care of the mules, and they went on sick call, just like the GI, and you kept morning reports on the mules. They were more trouble than the Army, than all the troops.
When you were in combat, were there many casualties in your unit?
Yeah, there was quite a number. How many, I don't know exactly, but yes, there was quite a few, because we were up there with we were L Company, and sometimes we were in the reserve, and sometimes we were Point Company.
What was your most memorable experience during that Italian campaign?
Well, probably, when we out of River Ridge, of course, going through the country over there, you're sort of amazed at the country. But I think probably after River Ridge, it was better fighting all the way along then, and that was probably the memorable. And also when we went through the Po Valley.
Through the Po
Yeah,
Valley.
right. And that was pretty memorable part of the whole campaign.
What did you receive any medals or citations?
Oh yeah, they wouldn't buy you a cup of coffee.
Well, I know, but it's important though. Well, if you could just mention those.
All right, I have 5 Purple Hearts and a couple of Silver Stars and 3 Bronze Stars and the combat medals, the Mediterranean and the Korean combat campaigns. I have them all in there, as I said. And the combat infantry badge with a star on it, Korea and World War II. but they, as I say, most of the people today don't know what they mean anyway. You do.
Oh, I do.
You do, and a lot of people do that interview, they know what they are.
5 Purple Hearts in Vietnam. When you got wounded 3 times, you were evacuated back to the States.
Yeah, and I was back and also when I was in Austria, when I got hurt in Austria, I was in an Austrian hospital for a while, and that was a great hospital because every morning they came through and gave you a shot of schnapps. That was a great hospital. That was at Saalfelden, but when I was hitting in Korea the last time, I was in Japan at the hospital. That was a great hospital.
Well, we had Yokosuka, the Marine Corps did. What was your hospital?
God, I don't remember even.
No, they had a couple of them. Yeah. That's where everybody went initially, is to Japan if they could be transported. Yeah,
that was a great hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that was terrific there. Of course, I think the Japanese tried to be extra nice to us in Japan, but that was great.
Let's go to when World War II ended and the Germans surrendered, and what happened after Germany surrendered and your deployment from that point?
Well, when the 10th Mounted Division was supposed to go to Japan.
That's what Ralph Ball told me.
Yeah, and they were supposed to go to Japan, but that's the time that they dropped the big bomb. Mm-hmm. And so we came back to the States, but I was in the hospital at that time. And so then I was down at Fitzsimmons, and when I got out of Fitzsimmons, I went back to Fort Carson. Mm-hmm. And when I come out of Korea, I was at Madigan General.
Oh, up in Tacoma, Washington.
Right.
Yeah, I know that hospital.
Right, that's where it rains all the time.
Right.
Like Fort Lewis.
That's why we live down here in Colorado.
God, I tell you, I used to go down there when you Fort Lewis. You get down there and stand out there, and it'd be nice, and all of a sudden a downpour. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Boy, it'll glad to get out of Fort Lewis.
Well, most of the interviews that we've done with the 10th Mountain Division, everyone except you were not career, and you were career. So from 1945 to 50, you were in the States training. Mm-hmm. And then in June of 1950, the North Koreans invaded South Korea, and the Marines and the Army were deployed to Korea.
Right.
And where were you deployed from?
I was from Fort Carson.
Fort Carson.
Right. That's when they got on an airplane and out to Stapleton and went to Japan.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do in Japan before?
Nothing. I was shipped right up to Hokkaido.
Hokkaido.
Yeah, that's where we trained up there, and ran up that mountain. What the Mount Fuji, was it?
No, Fuji's on the main island. I've climbed Fuji, and I've skied in
there was
Hokkaido.
some mountain
Hakone? Anyway, they had the Olympics there in 1972. I was there just the year before.
Oh, yeah, and anyway, we trained there, and so then we were, as I say, that's when they got us up at midnight, see if we were ready, and then they got us up at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever time, and then we were finally deployed from there.
You deployed directly into Incheon and joined up with the Marines?
Right. So they shipped us out of there and went right on into the Marines, and that's when we loaded on those crafts. God, that was something.
I spent my career in those crafts, in and out.
Boy, I was, being dry land. Of course, when we went overseas in World War II, we were on the big ships, but boy, loading on those things, and they were like this.
You went in with the 5th Marines, which was my old regiment in Vietnam, And went in and captured Seoul.
So,
Marines were on the right, and you were up on the hill on the left
Right.
there, the 32nd. After that was secured, where did you deploy to in Korea?
well, we went, I can't remember some of the hills up there. We went through there, and I remember ended up up at Frozen Chosen.
To get to Frozen Chosen, did you get on a ship and go back to Hungnam and go up to the
Right,
Chosen?
right,
Yeah, that's exactly the Marines and you went together up
right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and what kind of equipment did you have up there in the Frozen Chosen?
Lousy equipment. Same outfits we had. Of course, they gave us bunny boots to white for that, but our uniform, we had parkas with fur on them, but we had nothing. You know, we had brutal clothing. The cold was.
Well, I know our forces went up to Pyongyang, and MacArthur said, the boys will be home
By Christmas.
by Christmas, and we're going to send a division to Europe. But
Sure.
that didn't happen, did it?
No, it certainly didn't. That's when I made my way out of there finally. Finally they said, you know, everybody for himself. And so I made my way out there and got on the USS Missouri.
Mm-hmm. We talked about the Missouri. That was the battleship that Japan surrendered to MacArthur.
Right.
And when I was in Vietnam, they were firing naval gunfire 16 inches for us, the New Jersey actually. But the battleships were still around in the 60s, but now they're mothballed.
Oh yeah, they mothballed the USS Missouri.
Right.
Right.
It's in Hawaii now.
Right.
Yeah, at the Arizona Memorial. Well, let's just then after Korea, you came back to the States, to CONUS, as we call it.
Right.
And where were you stationed then?
Well, when I came back, and then I was up at Madigan General, and then
Recovering?
and then I got out there and went to Fort Carson, and that was interesting. Then, I was shot up so bad, and I wanted to stay in the Army, and I had a choice to go down to stay at Fort Carson and rehab there, or go in the reserves. My choice was to go in the reserves because I wanted to go back to the Army. And so when I went out, stayed in the reserves, and went to McCall, Idaho, and that's when I formed a ski team and junior ski team. Then we formed that's where they had the junior nationals now. Lee Backus and myself formed that. But every month I had to go down to Boise for a physical at the recruiting station.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went down there every month, and then I formed that ski team, and Lee Backus from Boise and I was the one that started the junior nationals. And so then right right time before Korea, then they said, okay, you're ready to go back to active duty.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, fine, terrific. So then they sent me from there to Monterey.
The language school, or?
Well, it was down there, but
Sure.
then they shipped me from there to
Fort
Fort Carson.
Fort Carson.
And then they shipped me overseas.
At one point, in what year did you go to Dartmouth College?
I went there when I came out of Alaska in 1958.
And what were you doing, and why did the Army send you to Dartmouth?
Well, the Minnie Dole that started the 10th Mountain Division,
Mm-hmm.
the PN.
And he started the National Ski Patrol too.
He started the National. That's where he got the spin-off to start the. And some of the first people in the 10th Mountain Division were out of Dartmouth College,
Mm-hmm.
and he started that, and so Dartmouth tried to get because they had that famous ski team out of Walter Prager and Dick Durrance and all those famous skiers were out of Dartmouth, and Minnie Dole wanted to start a mountain training center at Dartmouth College, and I guess I don't know how many years he worked on it, but about the time I was in Alaska and came out of Alaska, that's when they had it set, and that's when they picked me from, and that's when they wanted me to stay. That's about the time they started the Army biathlon team up at Fort Rich, down at so at Anchorage, and they wanted me to stay there, and I said no, I've had enough of Alaska, and so they asked me at there, and they said I was shipped back to Fort Carson again, and I had a flyer that come in, and I call him a flyer to come in, and I could either go to Dartmouth College or the Pentagon, and that's when I called up General Hay, who was a good friend. I knew when I knew him as a major in the Army, he was our 3rd Battalion commander. John Hay was. He retired and lived over at Ridgeway. And I called him up, and that's when he told me, he said, don't go to the fog factory. He said, go to Dartmouth College. That's the best assignment I ever had in the Army. And it got me ready for civilian life and working with those cadets. And we put on rock climbing demonstrations, and it was really a rewarding experience to deal with those cadets. They and the draftees of Peter Green and Charlie Patterson and all those young boys, and to deal with those kids, and then dealing with those ROTC, the mountaineering program at Dartmouth was all volunteer, and you could go into it or you couldn't. And Dartmouth College was probably the last, when they go to summer camp every year down at Fort Devens, or some of the schools go to Fort Bragg, and so they down at Fort Devens, we were down there, and God, Dartmouth is always the bottom rung, and so after this mountaineering program come in, and these cadets, I cut them no slack. We put on rock climbing demonstrations. Those pictures you saw in the garage at the end, those rope tows across the Connecticut River, those bridges, and I set up a rock climbing, and then also a firing range over in Vermont. We set up a firing range where we got live ammo and also machine guns and BARs. I got mortars, but of course we didn't fire those, but they were trained in them, and they knew how to fire when they went to Devens. They were good shots there, and also they knew how to pass a foot locker, and they knew their left foot from their right, and so Dartmouth, through all those cadets that went into there, and they come up, and the East was the top school in the East from bottom. Not that I had any, I had training those kids, and they were so interested in doing it. And also we helped train up at the Dartmouth Outing Club in their facilities. John Rand at the time was the president of Dartmouth, the Outing Club, and that was part of it. And so we joined forces with the Outing Club, and it was fantastic. Those cadets you only had to tell them once.
Did you get up to Tuckerman's Ravine?
Oh yes, yeah. Oh yeah, we was up there in Mount Washington. We went in. The Army they were really great. I had, they they had an Army sedan up there in the ROTC, but they gave us another Army sedan and a truck, a big deuce and a half. We could haul people in, and that was a real experience too. I had all this equipment coming in from climbing ropes and all the weapons and different uniforms. We had got fatigues for them and boots and a whole ball of wax. And so I was in there taking all this stuff down and putting it in. And so Mr. Poor was a property custodian. And he said, property manager it was. And he said, you're not supposed to be cleaning all this equipment up in here and cleaning this mess up. I said, well, who's going to do it? And he said, well, we got custodians. I said, send those damn janitors in here. He said, I'll have you know, Sergeant, they're not janitors, they're custodians. And I said, good, well, that's great. And the first time, and I always tried to vote every place I could. And so I went down, I got in my uniform and all my decorations on. I went down to the place to register to vote, and here was these New Hampshireites sitting around. God, have you ever been back there to see it?
I've been to Vermont, into Middlebury College, University of Vermont. I've been
the world can drop right around their ears and nothing bothers.
It can get cold.
And so anyway, they said, and I walked in there and I said, where do I register to vote, sir? He said to me, he said, American citizen? I said, yes, I'm American citizen. And he said, American citizen? And I said, yes. And I said, yes. So I said, well, where do I register? And he said, over that table. So I went over there. But that was a real experience, from the property custodian, janitor, to the property custodian, to an American citizen in New Hampshire. There was real indoctrination.
Preparing you for the ski industry when you got out.
Right.
You retired in December '65, so your wars were World War II and Korea. Mine was Vietnam, and looks like you were pretty close to maybe possibly going to Vietnam.
I was. I volunteered. They wouldn't let me. So.
They wouldn't let you go, no. But you were ready, willing, and able.
Oh, I wanted to. That's where the action was.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of drop back and we're going to talk about both World War II in Italy and Korea, and these are just general questions. How did you stay in touch with your family?
Didn't have any. Only my father and mother.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Did you write any letters to anyone?
Oh, really, no.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'd get letters once in a while, but no, I didn't.
I know the censors were pretty busy there with their black pens.
Oh yeah, so I didn't.
You were too busy.
I wouldn't.
Taking care of your troops.
I didn't worry about that. That was at least.
Well, you know, in the military,
had more to worry about than writing letters.
Yeah, you take care of your troops, and the troops will take care of you.
Yeah, that's right. You know.
Yeah.
And if you're a good leader, then show the example.
You set the example. And what kind of food did you have in World War II, as far as?
Oh, it was great stuff. I had K rations, fantastic. C rations, frozen C rations. That was terrific. And that's in combat.
Frozen Charlies in Korea.
Oh God, the best ones was beans and wieners.
That was my favorite.
That's
I trade them for beans and franks and peaches, and then the cookies with the cream in the middle.
And the K rations were really terrific.
Yeah, I had some K's, nearly broke a tooth. They were old ones we had. Was there anything that you did for good luck before you went in any of your force?
No, I guess probably I was sort of an atheist. You know, before I went into combat, I'm sure they did in the Marines. A chaplain would come up and talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
I never went to him. I always stood back because you had to set the example. I always stood in the back, but I think that that was a good thing. And that's where discipline comes in, because you knew that some of the troops you had been training with were going to die out there, and if the guy on your right or the guy on your left, the discipline come in to be your buddy there. And so that was sometimes hard to beat, and some of those kids didn't last very long.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always very sad, but I think that's where all the discipline comes in.
Mm-hmm. just looking around the streets here in Grand Junction, what would be your observation about some of the young men out there and how you think they would fare in your military?
Well, let me tell you something. Maybe I watched some of this, the war. You see that?
Well, I saw the whole series.
Yeah, I saw a lot of it. You know, the people that should see that was these 17-year-old kids, these 14, 15, 16-year-old kids that's got their pants hanging clear down and around their rear end with a cell phone on them. They're the ones that should be watching this, that documentary. And they and all these protesters, they're out there. I think everybody forgot the reason they can protest, and these kids that are running around and making all kinds of noise. Did they ever happen to think a lot of us sacrificed a lot so they could do that?
They could do it. Yeah.
And I don't think that they realized the people that should be watching that film never watched it.
Well, it's the best one I've seen. I thought I'd seen all the combat footage, but everything was new.
Yeah,
So
there were a lot.
basically,
Yeah, that's
it really
right.
was. Well, how did you entertain yourselves? Cards or
No, I'm not. Well, yes,
the
I
troops?
was a pretty good poker player, but when I went overseas, I had a guy that was from Pueblo, was a expert dealer. That's where he made his living, is gambling down in Las Vegas, and he would never roll the dice on the deck. They always had to be on a blanket. He could roll the dice, whatever he wanted to do, on a blanket, but not on the deck. He couldn't. But I played cards. Yes, I played poker. But when my last year at Fort Devens, all the first sergeant, I was the sergeant of the command sergeant at last year at Devens of the camp of the ROTC, and they all at the end of the year they all played cards down at headquarters, and so I went down and we played till about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I had all their money, so I threw my cards in the middle of the table, and I said, "That's the last deck of cards I'll ever pick up." And they said, "Sarge, let's stay here and maybe we can get back our money." I rolled it up and put it in my pocket, and I haven't picked up a deck of cards. I haven't picked up a deck of cards.
Were there any USO shows in Italy?
Not that I know of. I didn't see any. No.
How about in Korea?
I didn't see any there. I didn't see any there. No, I know there wasn't any there.
Yeah. And did you ever get, well, let's call it R&R in Italy at the lake, or say in Korea? Did you go, say, up to Taiwan on R&R?
No, in Korea, no, but in Italy, yes, we went back. They had an R&R, but I went back but I didn't stay there. No, I didn't. I went back once and never went again.
Well, in your Army career, can you remember any pranks that any of the troops played, or anybody played on you?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. Yeah, a lot of them played on me. Yeah, right. But I don't. They had always a name for me naturally, and they called me Foghorn.
Foghorn?
Yeah, Foghorn Brown. That's in probably some of those articles up there. But yeah, they like to, when I finally got some rank, which was early and had room. Once in a while the room was unlocked and they would go in there, yes, and they would give me some of their own treatment.
Well, I know in the Marine Corps and being an officer, I know the troops always had names for the seniors, in their outfit. And
the names
they didn't talk about it, but I would catch a trace of it now and then.
The names they call me is not fit to be heard right here.
Did you keep a personal diary?
Nope,
Nope.
never.
Too busy
No,
leading
I didn't have time for that.
yeah. Well, I've got a photograph here. I'd like to take a look at this one here. Can you tell us a little bit about this photo here?
Right, that was taken in Saalfelden, Austria.
In Austria, yeah.
And that's when
What year was that?
That was training the NATO troops.
NATO.
Yeah, NATO. They would send us over there, and we'd train them up on the glaciers. Mm-hmm. And so that was interesting too, to see all the rest of them.
Didn't you have some pretty good R&R spots in Germany in that time, like at Garmisch? Or?
Oh yeah, they had. Oh yeah, there was some great. That was interesting when it was in Austria. When our headquarters was back at Saalfelden in Austria, and there we lived in Quonset huts there too, at the Mountain Training Center. It was interesting. All those troops would sit around and they had a chance to go to Berchtesgaden, all those places in Europe, the special service. All they had to do was go up and down and sign up for them. Mm-hmm. And they said, I'd say, you guys, what are you doing this weekend? Sarge, there's nothing to do. God, can you hear them sitting on their foot lockers saying that? And I said, go down to special service and sign up, go to Berchtesgaden, go skiing, go to all these ski areas. They had all those ski areas in Austria. And Europe, that's where I went all the time, because that's where I got some ideas. I was going to, if I ever had a chance to build a ski area, I'd make wide runs rather than toboggan chutes. That's the way they have in the East. And back in Europe, God, they had those narrow trails, concrete, pure ice.
Well, I've been on leave in Garmisch.
Oh yeah, that's a great place.
Turken, and in 1994 we took our high school hockey team from Aspen to Garmisch, which is a sister city, and played hockey there. And I had, around in the middle 50s, friends that were on the ski patrol. Now these are Army guys.
Yeah, right.
And they were on the ski patrol at the Zug's pits there.
Oh yeah, right.
And the only time they wore the uniform was payday. Every 2 weeks they'd come in and get paid and then go back on the mountain there. So those were pretty good days then,
Oh yeah, that's right. I saw John Claude and Stein Erikson and all those people skiing over in Europe, because they were racing all those courses over in Europe. And so I had a chance. I took that every opportunity I could to go in those ski areas and see how they were built, because I figured if I ever had a chance to work in the ski area when I got out of the Army, I wanted to get some idea.
We're leading up to Vail.
That's right, and that's when I leading up to Vail. That's when I, back in the East in New England, they just cut the trees off and left the stumps and all the rest of it, and up to Vail, I'm the one that started that, and got all tried to trouble at first on it. We didn't cut the trees. I took the big iron, 3 or 4 cats, and cut a swath down, and then dig big holes and trenches and push all the trees in it. And cut all this, and so you had smooth courses and all the rocks, and then take all the side hill out of it with the cats. And so in the first meeting I went to, in fact, people from Aspen came over there. It was back in Waterville, New Hampshire, and where Tommy Cochran was, and God, they'd never heard of anything like it, like Shivers up at Winter Park and all the rest of them. And so Peter said, when you come back to Vail, that's when I started building Gold Peak. And I cut a big trench up there and pushed all. Have you been up to Vail?
Oh yeah.
Gold Peak up there. That's where the first one I did up there. And they dug a big trench and lined up 3 TD-25s at that time, and now they used. And then the later years used all the H and 9s, and lined 3 or 4 of them up and go down and push everything in, and then have one cat come by and level up, and then we seed and strawed the whole thing and had grass. But today you wouldn't be able to do that.
The environmental thing. I was the risk manager at Aspen Highlands, and I'd go over to Vail because you were way ahead of us. I worked with Lloyd's of London.
Oh, yeah.
And we took a lot of ideas back over to Aspen.
Right.
From you, and we shared them.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, in the industry, we shared them.
And so they, that's when all the rest of them started doing that also, because, you know, in the, and now the snowmaking, you know, I put the snowmaking at Gold Peak, and then I mowed all the grass in the summertime, so you had smooth slopes, wide slopes, because well, I had a patrolman, Chan Whaling, who was a Colorado School of Mines graduate, and he figured one skier pushed 2,000 pounds of snow a day, a ton of snow a day, and they put it all out in the trees. So I made those big wide slopes smooth, and so that people could spread out the skiers and not wear out the slopes.
Well, this is the direction the skiing's going today in with the graying of the population of skiers. They're older. There's more groomed runs now than for their skills.
Oh, right. You know, when I went to Vail, the lift ticket was $7.50. Now it's $85, $86. But the people demand that. But also, like for instance, like up at Powderhorn, they raised the lift ticket to $45, and that $5 went to the insurance companies. You know, the people, and then the people, you know, the cats used to be $7,000, $8,000, and now they're $350,000. And you used to be able to put a lift in for $1 million, but you can't buy the rope for that today. And people demand that. People demand a slope like this floor, and they demand it wide and easy to ski on. And that's when I dug I had them take all the trees out from under far out from the lift lines, and make the trails under the lift lines. People like to be seen under the lift lines.
Oh, yeah.
And so I did all that.
Exhibition run, and Stein Erickson went over to Deer Valley in Utah, and they started that perfect grooming. Yeah,
well, I was over. I went over there with Peter at Deer Valley, and I talked to him over there, and they came over and watched what we were doing over there. But that was a long, hard sell. But I had some pull too, because Mr. Peterson, who was the head of the Forest Service in Washington, D.C., was a personal friend of mine. So when they gave me a bad time, I'd call him up.
Well, there's more that we want to talk about at Vail and the ski business, and I just wanted to make the transition from military to civilian life. You retired in December of 1965, and where were you when you retired from the Army? What station?
Up at Dartmouth.
At Dartmouth.
Yeah, right.
And did you do any use the GI Bill at all?
No.
No, you had it,
No.
but you didn't. You were busy training
I
and
didn't need
skiing. Have you maintained any friendships with any of the service guys? Obviously, you have
Oh, yeah, right.
a tight bond in the tent.
Oh, yeah, right. Definitely, and those kids over at Aspen, and even in Connecticut and back east, I hear from them all the time.
How about the Korean War veterans?
No.
That was kind of calling up the reserves. And,
right. No, that was a different
fast
war.
Deal.
That's just like the Vietnam. That's a program.
Belong to any veterans organizations?
Well, they harassed me to the point I joined the American Legion and the VFW, but God, they give me phone calls and letters, so it was easier to join them and fight them.
There you go. So anyway, the question here is that we're going to go into the ski business. Is that, do you feel that the military prepared you for what you did in civilian life? Did you think that people that serve in the military are maybe a little different from those who didn't?
Oh yeah, that's what, up at Vail, they were, that was a roustabout group when I got in there. The trail crew was supposed to be, they were supposed to be packers and so on and so forth. When I got there, you couldn't find them. And then also they had the ticket packers. God, that was that was a fire call outfit. And they'd come in, and they were under the trail crew, and you couldn't find them. And they'd come in the morning and give 2 tickets to going up and packing the runs. Then they'd go out to the covered bridge store and sell them for $5. And then they had an armband. They could ski free for the next day. And I said, now, I'm not very smart, but now we could hire more patrolmen for what those ticket packers are selling our tickets. So I got rid of them. So then, so that was bad. And so then the next thing, trail crew, I couldn't find them most of the time. And I found out 2 of them, the guy was in charge and his assistant, when they turned the ticket packers loose, they went down to Gorsuch and scraped skis. Got paid 2 ways. So then Dick Houseman, who was, I'm sure you heard of him, he was a very good friend of mine later, but he had big money in Vail, and he was a fantastic guy. But he called up Peter, and he said, this sergeant you brought in here is breaking down the morale of all the employees, and he's firing them. Peter said, don't worry about it, it'll all come out. And so that was that era. And so then I got rid of all the ticket packers, and then I got rid of those trail crew guys. So the next thing I was going to work on is the NSPS.
I was just going to ask that question, the relationship between the poles and the
so then I got up there,
national.
And God, they had to talk about a fat city. They got season passes for they and their families. They got their food half price on the mountain. We furnished them lodging. And I said, now wait a minute. Why can't we now, as I said, not very smart, but this is costing the company a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So I went down to the finance wizards and the bean counters, and I said, now, let me get rid of all those people, and let's hire 3 or 4 more patrolmen. And he said, well, so we commenced. And that was a real Donnybrook, because a lot of those NSPS were lawyers, mm-hmm. and freeloaders and professional. And we had Holmes, Roberts, and Owens was the law firm we used. Man, I spent a lot of time down there in that law firm with those guys.
Well, that sounds similar to my experiences at Highlands, where I was the risk manager and safety and ran the patrol, and we had volunteer patrol. And we had problems with workmen's compensation because they weren't being paid, and we did away with it finally, and then went the patrol route, the pro route.
Oh yeah, you had to, there you got control of them.
Yeah.
And then I put a time clock in. That was sort of a disaster for them. Mm-hmm. So I could find out when they come and when they left.
I'm hearing military structure here. I mean, it's not.
Hey, they're getting paid for a day. Let's put a day's work in.
That's right, and don't steal from the company.
And they wore their uniforms at night. They were parkas, and in the ski school, they wore their parkas at night. And I said, now this is crazy. How can you keep them clean all day, slopping around the bar? So I cut out that.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. When you were in the management, were you out on the mountain on your skis?
Every
much?
day.
Every day.
Every day. Had a black book, and every foreman, every person that worked for me, foremans and managers had a black book. And they better write on it too.
Well, I saw a number of your skiing trophies in the military and around, so that's one thing in being in ski management is to set the example and to be a good skier and be on top of it.
Right.
I've heard rumors over at Aspen Highlands you had your radio going 24/7.
I had a
2 o'clock in the morning.
I had a PBX in the house.
In the house.
In the house. And I was to work every morning at 4 o'clock because the gondola took all the food up the mountain and loaded onto the cats for the outdoor restaurants. And if that didn't start up to get all that out of there, we were hurting. So I would be there. Loved every day of it because every day was a challenge between building the ski areas and working. I loved every day of it, 80, 90 hours a week.
Yeah, well, I'm still in it. I retired 28 years ago, and I'm still in the ski business, teaching now.
Oh, yeah,
not
that's
management,
good.
but teaching skiing.
No, I would probably be doing something over there too, or maybe I could have stayed at Vail forever, but it was time to leave. You know, it was like the same way in the Army. It was time to leave. And the same way at Vail, I'm the only one that lasted to that original group. Went through 5 different presidents and ownership, you know, and all the rest of it. And I was lucky or fortunate to stay there for 25 years nearly.
When you came from Dartmouth to Vail, Pete Siebert and who else was there?
Bob Parker.
Bob Parker. And you knew them from the 10th Mountain Division?
Oh, yeah, right.
So there's that bond there, and throughout the whole United States, what the ground floor that the 10th Mountain laid for our modern ski business was from the 10th Mountain.
Right.
All over. I've talked to all kinds of people
Right.
in ski areas all over the United States. The 10th Mountain
That's right.
shows up.
Oh, yeah, that's good. You know, many of them are, and they're still there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me just go to, here's a magazine article here that I picked up in your garage, which you have a living museum here.
Yeah, that's right.
And you tell me that the museum is kind of being farmed out to Vail?
Vail, right.
And where else would it be?
The National Ski Hall of Fame wants some of it, but Vail has the first go-around of it.
Well, I don't know how much you had before, but you sure got a lot now.
Yeah, well, a lot of it's gone.
We enjoyed it today. Well, anyway, this magazine article is Rocky Mountain West, December 75, Colorado and the Mountain States, and basically it says here, big man behind the mountain.
You can throw that away.
Sarge Brown's domain encompasses the ski slopes of Vail and everything the heavens drop on them. Needless to say, he rules it with an old top kicks iron hand.
Right.
So there's a photograph of you right there.
Yeah, that was
with a cigar.
Yeah, that's what they wanted, a cigar, so I gave them a cigar.
Yeah, so because I heard your reputation over at Highlands for years.
Right.
And I just met you today personally,
Right.
so I'm real glad to meet up with a legend. Let me ask a question about VIPs and different people that you met and what's associated with, let's say, presidents of the United States.
Right. Well, the skiing gave me an opportunity to meet great people. And Mr. Ford was a personal friend of mine since 1969 when he was a congressman out of Michigan and bought his first condo at the lodge. And he was truly a great friend, and I heard from him several times, even when he was president. As you noticed, I was back there and in the White House, and also back there when he took me back there to Bethesda when I was operated on, and he watched it very close, and I appreciated very much. And also I got to know the head man of the Secret Service. Also, I worked with the FBI because all the visiting firemen, I'd go to Denver and get briefed by the FBI, and several times, and the visiting firemen would come in, and I got acquainted with them, which was really interesting. And of course, the Secret Service, I worked with them all the time, and through Mr. Ford, and when he sent his kids up there which are grown men with families now, and took care of him. And as you see, some of the other president's kids were sent up to Vail, and through, I guess, word of mouth from Mr. Ford, I guess that's the only reason, and they would call me up. And so I got to talk with several of them, which was a real honor. As you can see, the autographs on some of the pictures.
Well, I've been through every room in your house, and there's Ronald Reagan over here with an autograph, and Jimmy Carter, and
so there, and
the
Michael.
first Bush, and on and on and on.
So anyway, Michael Reagan, as you see him now on the tube, and hear him on the radio, but it was a real privilege, and I had my foot in the door, and the ski industry gave me that opportunity. Mm-hmm. But you get out of anything what you put in it.
That's right. Here's a letter here, if you don't mind. This is from Gerald R. Ford, dated April 22nd, 1989. To you, dear Bill, Betty and I will always be deeply grateful for your many kindnesses and loyal support. You have been a wonderful friend, and we treasure that relationship. Vail Mountain will not be the same without your leadership. All of us who have skied Vail and Beaver Creek while you were in charge know what a great job you did. We thank you. Betty and I wish you the very best on your retirement. You have our admiration and appreciation. Warmest regards, Jerry Ford, with the letterhead here from the President of the United States. Then I'd like to ask you, I seen out in your garage a homologation certificate, which verifies the ski runs, and it seems to me like you've been around the world, international, Europe, and did you ever deal with, let's say, any of the Soviet countries?
Oh yes, I dealt with the Russians. When we were bidding for the '89 World Championships, I picked up the Russians because we needed them for voting to get the championships, and they controlled all the bloc countries. And the KGB, this colonel was a full-bird colonel that spoke numerous languages and perfect English. And he had a couple henchmen, as I called them, with him all the time. So I picked them up in Vancouver, and so every place I went, all the different countries, they were there because they were, as you see now, they were paving their way to get Olympics and FIS races, and so he was with all these areas that we were going to, and so then we went to Russia. I was in Moscow, Leningrad, and we had meetings. When you go to a meeting in Moscow, you go down the room, they lock the door behind you. And so then because they controlled those boats and we needed them, but it was interesting. Out on looking out the window, we were met out at the sports arena in Moscow, and I looked out there and I saw these jumpers in the summertime. jumping.
In the summertime.
Summertime, and they had this in-run, you know, like they do in the over at Steamboat and some of these places where, and even they had an in-run up at Dartmouth, and they had water and looked like AstroTurf on there, and they had water on the in-run and on the landing, and I wanted to go out and look at it to see what it was, and that was nix. No, you can't do that. But when we got into Moscow, went down to, we went into the International Hotel and turned in our passports, and they counted all of our money. Had to turn in our traveler's checks and counted all of our money, and when we go out to have dinner, they were right with us. You went no place. When you left the hotel, they were with us. And they liked 4 Roses whiskey and Marlboro cigarettes in the box. So I went down to American Embassy and got a case of whiskey and a case of Marlboros and hand them out to them. But there was an interesting thing. As I said previously, the medals and the rubles they gave me, but no printed material that would go out. Nothing. The interviews I did on the television and newspapers, nothing.
Well, you did get a couple of medals.
Oh yeah, the medals and the rubles, the stuff they gave me, and the belt buckle from this KGB colonel they gave me. You could take that out, but no newspaper, no print. That was nix. They were an interesting group. I don't know, it was really dismal over there, but I don't know how it is now. Maybe it's better, I don't know.
Well, after you retired, I just want to read this article. It says, Sarge Brown is named to the U.S. National Ski Hall of Fame, and that's in
Ishpeming,
Michigan. Yeah.
Right.
Bill Sarge Brown, who over a course of 20 years helped shape Vail Mountain into one of the finest ski areas in the United States, and has been voted into the United States National Ski Hall of Fame. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Did you go back to Ishpeming?
I went back when they dedicated the new Ski Hall of Fame, and I was back there, yes. And they have a real nice new building. Before they they had a makeshift building, but all the donations and the beer company gave enough money that now they have a very nice building. Really terrific museum, and it's really nice.
That's wonderful. Well, what we're led up to here is what the 10th Mountain Division has done for skiing in this country, and the reason we're here today is to record this story and pass it on to the Library of Congress and through ski towns in ski country, and to let the youth know that are coming on what you as the 10th Mountain Division did. In working for Fritz Benedict, he started the 10th Mountain hut system.
Right.
And that's being used by many people today. And I think the thing that's important is that through your Blizzard newsletter and through your...
That's Pravda, I call it.
Do you call that Pravda?
Oh, that's a Pravda.
Well, I've seen that. And it's going to be perpetuated, the history of the 10th Mountain. Karen Woodard, who is here with us today, her father was in the 10th Mountain Division.
Right.
And she is a descendant. And so there's an organization of young people that
You're gonna have to take
are
it
carrying
over.
on this tradition here.
That's right.
And I think that's very, very powerful and very good for the country and the 10th Mountain and for the military.
That's right. That's terrific. And also, I think that now, they turned that over to the 10th Mountain Division in Fort Drum, New York.
Fort Drum.
Right.
I just called Fort Drum on Thursday to visit a little bit, and they're light infantry. There are 3 combat infantry brigades. The first one is coming back next week, and the second's
Right.
going over. So they have the division, and of course they were sent there initially to Fort Drum because of the cold weather, but they're deployed in
Yeah, right.
in the hot place.
Yeah, they're right.
So you have to be prepared for all climates
Sure.
if you're in the military.
That's right. Take what they throw at you.
That's right, and go for it.
Yeah.
In closing, Sarge, we want to thank you for your time and allowing us to come into your beautiful home here
Right.
in Grand Junction. Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered? We've skipped around a lot of places.
Well, that's not the only thing I can add is that I hope that, that the young 10th Mountain Division carries on as we have today, and the descendants got all of our money down there, and they won't spend any of it. So I hope that they carry on and spend some of that money. And but it's been a pleasure, and I hope that we can pass this on to the people that the freedom they have today is because of the soldiers and Marines and Air Force, and that gave them that freedom.
This will get on, and we air the interviews on Grassroots Television in Aspen continuously on Veterans Day and Memorial Day. And one thing I'd like to add is that you mentioned the money, and so we're always raising funds for these projects here, this Library of Congress.
Get some from those descendants.
Get some from the descendants.
They got a lot of it.
And so in order to raise money, we're having a fundraiser in Aspen, and Abby's coming with her film, The Last Ridge.
Right.
And we are going into the schools in Aspen to spread the story. Abby's going to go. She's doing this around the United States to carry this story to the young people so that these traditions in our country will remain strong in the future.
I hope so. As I said, those kids that should have seen that documentary on the war should have been watching that, rather than down at the malls and the rest of it on their pants hanging down and their cell phones on their belt.
Well, our interview today, we hope will help turn that around.
Yeah, right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Right.
Good afternoon. How long?